Thank you, Mr. President. I join my colleagues this afternoon in speaking on the joint resolution on the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran. And while we recognize that the anticipated vote that we would hope to have had on this, that as 98 of us agreed would happen, that we're going to see that delayed due to the failed cloture vote this afternoon, I wanted to make clear my position on this agreement. And we use the term deal around here, talking about the Iran deal. And I almost feel like we need to put it in quotation marks, because in my mind, a deal is something that has been negotiated and give and take back and forth, and that there is an agreement that is relatively even-handed or fair on both sides. And Mr. President, I do not believe that this deal is a fair deal. And it is with that I will support the resolution of disapproval when we have that opportunity for that vote. This is not where I had hoped that I would be on this, because I do believe, and I believe strongly, that diplomacy is the way that we solve disagreements around the world. And I think that most of us were actually very hopeful when the administration began negotiations some years ago with the aim and with the purpose that Iran would cease its nuclear program and end its progress towards a nuclear weapon. I believe that our world would be safer if we were able to achieve those goals, without question. And these are goals that the President himself articulated. He stated specifically that that was his aim. But unfortunately, this agreement fails to meet those goals. Simply put, this agreement is not in our national interest. After considerable study and considering the terms of the agreement and the views of experts on both sides, the many closed hearings that we had, the many public hearings that were out there, I have concluded that this is not just a bad deal, Mr. President. I think this is a sad deal. I think this is a sad time for us because of this deal. In fact, this is a deal that borders on capitulation and appeasement, a deal that rewards nuclear extortion. Those are pretty tough words, but that's where I feel we are. A deal which is far worse than no deal at all. And I absolutely reject out of hand the statement from our president that we have no choice, that it is either this deal or it is war. That is a false choice, and I think it is wrong to put it that way before the American people. Certainly, these negotiations were hard. They were very difficult. That's the nature of these negotiations and deliberations. It is hard to push for more, to ask for more. But, Mr. President, other options do exist. And we have been here on the floor for several days talking back and forth. Well, what else is there? Well, first of all, there's the sanctions that got Iran to the table here in the first place. There are stronger sanctions. There's continued diplomacy. It is not an apt description to say it is this deal or it is war. Before I discuss my specific objections to the agreement, I would like to place my views on this agreement in context with my views on international agreements in general. I am certainly not opposed to joining with international partners in making the world a better and a more peaceful place on issues ranging from the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to the New START Treaty. I've worked with the administration. I've been there. And I approach these issues with an open mind, an open heart. And I have strived to maintain an open mind on this agreement. But quite honestly, it is hard. It is really hard, if not impossible, to maintain an open heart when it comes to Iran. Iran is not a country that is open to resetting relations in a world that clearly is seeking peace and a civil society. And Iran, before it entered into this agreement, it wasn't talking about a reset here. And it has shown no evidence of changing its ways because of where we are with this agreement now. We see it every day. Every day. Iran's senior leaders, these are not people in the street that we might not know who they are or their names. These are Iran's senior leaders that are leading the chant, "Death to America." And they said this before the agreement. One would think, maybe now that there has been this agreement, that tone would change. But no. In spite of all the efforts, Secretary Kerry and others, they are still chanting "Death to America" today. That hasn't changed. In fact, just yesterday, the Supreme Leader calls again for the obliteration of Israel. And again, Mr. President, these are not unknown persons in the street, rabble-rousers in the street. These are the leaders in Iran who are calling repeatedly for death to America, to wipe Israel off the map. You can say what you will about the purportedly moderate President Rouhani, but the facts speak for themselves. What we have the Washington Post's Tehran correspondent who's been in jail since July of 2014. Iran continues to hold him on trumped-up espionage charges. And he's not alone. Iran also holds an American pastor, a U.S. Marine who traveled to Iran to visit family members, and it's believed to hold Robert Levinson, who was kidnapped from an island off of Iran's coast. Iran continues to persecute Christians and Baha'is in its own country. These are flagrant human rights violations. This does not suggest to me that this is a regime that is ready for reform. This is not in historical context. This is here. This is now. These persecutions, these human rights violations, these imprisonments are right here, right now. And if this were not enough to cause one to question whether we can trust Iran to change its ways, consider this. Iran is a key funder of Hamas and Hezbollah, committed to the destruction of the state of Israel. It funds the rockets which are launched into Israel's sovereign territory from Gaza, southern Lebanon, from Syria. And these rockets don't threaten Iran's sworn enemy, the state of Israel. They also endanger civilian populations by inviting, if not demanding, immediate retaliation from Israel. So you have to ask the question, is this a nation that is committed to peace and good global citizenship? Hardly. It just is not. Now, I think we recognize, and you, Mr. President, in your capacity before coming to the Senate, have been engaged in diplomatic negotiations. And you know that in diplomacy, you often end up negotiating with those who don't share your views, don't share your values. So it's important, I think, for us to look at what Iran gives the world in return for this agreement. In light of the progress that Iran has made in its quest to develop a nuclear weapon, it was imperative to me that an agreement, if we're going to get to an agreement, the agreement must not simply arrest Iran's nuclear ambition, but require the abandonment of those ambitions. It had to stop those nuclear ambitions. And the agreement before us, viewed in absolutely the most favorable light, simply does not accomplish this goal. At best, we've pushed the pause button. At best, it puts a pause on Iran's final preparations towards becoming a full-fledged nuclear state. And even then, to regard that pause as meaningful requires me to suspend disbelief. I have to suspend my disbelief that Iran can be trusted to live up to the terms of the agreement. I must believe that even though Iran is not required to fully disclose the military dimensions of its existing nuclear program, the international verification mechanisms are indeed effective. I can't do that. I must also believe that other nations will be inclined to meaningfully call out Iran on violations and not simply rationalize them away in order to keep up the appearances that this deal is working. I don't think that's going to happen. Each of these assumptions is just a bridge too far. I can't get there. And I hear from Alaskans, as I know that you do, they're asking me, hey, what happened to these anytime, anywhere inspections that this administration was promising? Now they're not there? They're asking about these snapback sanctions. And it's a pretty catchy word, but what exactly does it mean? How feasible is it? Is it practicable in its implementation? And I can't look at him squarely in the eye and say, sure, you can count on those snapback provisions to come into play. And even if we could get them back in, you have to know that those sanctions would be weaker, would be less effective than what we have now. And then they're saying, well, what about these side agreements? These side agreements between Iran and the IAEA? How come only they know what's going on there? And when we can't go back to our constituents, when we can't go back to the good people of the great state of Alaska and say with confirmation that yes, we have these provisions that, on verification that give us that security, that yes, snapback sanctions are practicable in effect, that no, there are no side secret agreements. We can't do that. Before causing the release of billions of dollars in frozen Iranian assets and allowing sanctions to expire, I need some clear, some convincing, and really unequivocal evidence that this agreement will achieve what it set out to achieve. And ideally, I seek Iran's commitment to change its ways, act as a responsible player on the world stage. It's through sanctions, and we keep hearing this on both sides, whether you support this agreement or don't support this agreement. It was the sanctions that brought Iran to the table in the first place. And we will lose leverage. We will lose our leverage with Iran once those sanctions are dialed back. So whether it is 9 months or longer, we lose that leverage. So I am so concerned about where we are with unfreezing assets and releasing sanctions. Now, many of us have spoken on the floor here about how Iran will now have billions of dollars to spend creating further chaos in the Middle East, or arming Israel's enemies, or developing rockets which someday might be used to deliver those nuclear weapons. You've got to count me as one of the skeptics that Iran will somehow choose to do good with these newfound sources of revenue. That somehow they're going to be putting these resources into rebuilding roads and hospitals and infrastructure. I am that skeptic, and I think I join so many here in saying what we have seen when Iran didn't have access to those resources and the revenues that they funneled to direct and finance acts of terrorism throughout the Middle East. More money in their hands, to do more mischief, count me as a skeptic. Now, as you know, I focus a great deal on the energy issues as the chairman of the Energy Committee. I'm very concerned about the opportunities that this agreement affords Iran's oil sector, opportunities that come at the expense of America's economic opportunities and economy in the near term. The Energy Information Administration here in Washington and the International Energy Agency in Paris estimate that lifting sanctions on Iran could raise Iranian output by some 700,000 barrels per day. Now, we recognize, okay, that production is going to take some time to ramp up and to bring back online, perhaps well into next year and beyond, but it will come. But what we do have in place, ready to go, is Iran's floating storage facilities. They are ready to go now and move that oil out onto the market. These supplies will do what? They will work to push down global oil prices. We know that that's going to be a good thing for consumers everywhere. But, Mr. President, what do we do here in this country? We ban the exports of our oil. In effect, we sanction ourselves. So we're going to let Iran have access to the global oil market, put some 700,000 barrels a day of oil out there, gain new revenues to help their economy, and also do whatever else they may do. Create that havoc and chaos and mischief, fund terrorism. What we're going to see, Mr. President, oil tankers will be filling up at Karag Island instead of Galveston. They're going to be setting sail for our allies in South Korea, Japan, elsewhere. Our diplomacy, Mr. President, is going to benefit Iranian producers while our antiquated domestic policy is going to harm American producers. This misalignment, and I've outlined it in several white papers out there, we can correct that. We can correct it legislatively, and the administration can correct it. And now that the president claims that he has this veto-proof margin of support for the Iran deal, I think there's even greater urgency for this Congress to move on this issue. That's another issue, but I think it's important to raise. But it is just one of the many issues that I believe. I look at this and I say, Iran is looking at this as a good deal for them. They got the most out of this negotiation and gave the least. Iran's strategy of nuclear extortion has not been disabled. To the contrary, it's been rewarded. What do they get? What do they get? They get a pathway to nuclear weapons, ICBM program, conventional weapons, sanctions gone, stronger economy. Sounds like a pretty good deal for Iran. Sounds like a pretty good deal for Iran, but certainly not for the security of this country, not for the security of our allies. I would suspect that many of my colleagues, even some who are voting for this agreement, concur with my conclusion here that Iran's getting a better deal here. And we've seen a flurry of comments, not only in print, but we've certainly heard great discussion here on the floor that this agreement is flawed. It's not what we wanted. It's not what we would have negotiated. But the comments from colleagues that are supporting this are saying we have to take it because there is no other option out there. And what the president has said is it's this or it's war. There is no other option. If you don't like this plan, what's your plan? And then they say, we can't have the administration walk away because American prestige will suffer if Congress forces the administration to walk away from this deal. Mr. President, this is not about American prestige, and this should not be about a president's legacy. This is about our security as a nation. Just this morning, I met with a family three young girls in high school. They're from Juneau, Alaska, and they were doing a walkthrough of the Capitol, and they came over to my hideaway, and we were talking, and I was letting them know I'm finishing the comments on my statement here, and we got talking about this agreement, and they wanted to know my position on it. And I said, quite simply, I cannot support an agreement that fails to make our nation a safer place, fails to make the world a safer place. It has been suggested that this agreement is better than no deal. In other words, that a bad deal is better than no deal at all. And I cannot accept this. I cannot accept that. And I don't think that this is a situation where we're holding out for the perfect. To use the expression, we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I'm not looking for a perfect deal. I'm not looking for a perfect deal, but I am demanding one that makes our nation a safer place. Safer with the deal than without. And this agreement doesn't do it. And I place the blame firmly with the administration. The president did not work with this Congress. He did not, throughout the course of the negotiations, try to align our expectations with the direction that he was taking to really determine what a good agreement might look like that we could all concur with. So, Mr. President, I'm not surprised that this deal remains so unpopular with the American public. There's a whole bunch of polls out there. The latest one from Pew says only about 20% of the American people support this agreement. I do think that it is important that on this floor, in this Congress, you do have a bipartisan majority of members in the Senate and in the House that oppose this deal. And I think that that is important. And I do think that it's unfortunate with the vote that we took just hours ago, that we're not able to get to that resolution of disapproval at this point in time, something, again, that 98 of us agreed needed to happen, that we as the representatives from our state and representatives from our respective states around the country here would be able to speak to this issue by way of a vote. The American people want Iran out of the nuclear weapons business. It's pretty simple. And that means dismantlement. And the American people want their president to demonstrate backbone in the negotiations, not capitulation, not appeasement. Appeasement of Iran, whose leaders seem to take continued pride in this pattern of unacceptable and often reprehensible behavior. Mr. President, this deal simply does not get us there, and that is why I join so many others in opposition. I thank you for the privilege of the time on the floor and would yield the floor